Hey guys, just a quick thank you to all of you amazing legends that are subscribed. I could not have done it without you. But most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and like this video. It's free and it really helps our small team out. I almost didn't want to share this because, honestly, it's pretty messed up. And I've been trying to forget about it. But I figured maybe if I talk about it, they'll help me get it out of my head. So here it goes. I met Martin on Tinder, and at first it seemed pretty normal. I mean, I'm not a newbie to the whole online dating thing, and I've talked to a lot of weirdos in my time, but this one stood out for all the wrong reasons. You know how it goes: swipe right if the person looks halfway decent, and then you start chatting to see if they're actually cool or just another person with weird pics and no personality. Martin was the first type. His profile was pretty basic, looking for someone real, not into games. Typical stuff, right? But his pics, they weren't bad. He looked like a guy I might run into at the grocery store. Nothing too fancy, just an average dude. At first, the conversation was fine. Pretty chill, just small talk. He'd send those "how's your day?" messages I'd answer back, and we'd talk a bit about work or what we were watching on Netflix. He seemed normal at first, but the more we chatted, the more things started to feel a little off. He'd ask about random stuff like what my favorite food was, and then followed up with something totally weird like, "Would you make me dinner if we ever met up?" I laughed it off at first. Maybe he was just joking around. But then it kept happening. He'd ask stuff like that, along with comments like, "I bet you're one of those girls who's really good at cooking, huh?" I didn't think much of it at first, but it started to bug me. He started getting more personal too, asking about exes, whether I was a type to have long-term relationships or just a fling. He'd comment on my pictures in a weird way, like, "You look like someone who would enjoy being spoiled." It wasn't that it was creepy at first, but more like he was laying on a bit thick, like he was trying to make me think I owed him something. And honestly, I didn't really want to give him my number. I had a bad vibe and I didn't want to waste my time on someone who felt off. But then, out of nowhere, he asked for my number. At first, I didn't want to give it to him, but he was persistent. I was trying to figure out what to say. And then he said something that honestly put me on edge. He asked if I wanted to meet up and hang out. Normally, I'd be down, but for some reason, this guy just didn't sit right with me. I didn't want to get myself in a weird situation, so I told him that I wasn't ready to meet yet. That's when everything went downhill. He flipped out. I mean, his entire attitude changed. He started saying stuff like, "I knew it. You're just like all the others. Too good to give a guy like me a chance." I was like, what the hell? Dude, we barely even talked. But he kept going. The insults got worse, and the more I tried to calm the conversation down, the nastier he got. And then he said something that totally threw me off. He told me, "You're just good for one thing anyway. Go back to the kitchen and make me a tea and sandwich because that's all you're good for." At first, I thought it was some kind of weird joke, but the more I read the messages, the more I realized he was dead serious. My stomach dropped, and I just stared at the screen for a second, trying to process what I was reading. I couldn't believe this guy, who seemed so normal at first, had just turned into some sort of, well, I don't even know what to call it. I didn't even want to respond to him anymore, but part of me was still hoping he'd snap out of it and apologize. But no, he kept going. "You girls think you're all that, but deep down, you just want a guy to control you. Don't act like you don't. You'll be cooking my meals soon enough. You'll see." I was honestly at a loss for words. I had some pretty weird conversations with people online, but this was on a whole other level. The worst part, the guy just didn't let up. He kept sending more and more messages, each one nastier than the last. He started to talk about how women's only purpose was to serve men, like he genuinely believed that. I blocked him after that. I couldn't deal with it anymore, but even after blocking him, I was still shaken up. I kept thinking about how easily this guy had gone from being semi-normal to downright disturbing. I thought about how many other women he'd probably done this to and how many others might not have blocked him, but maybe just accepted it. Like, what if he'd said that to someone else and they thought they had to put up with it? Honestly, I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. And then, about a week later, I got a notification on Tinder. A message from Martin. I thought there was no way it could be him again. But it was. It was just as nasty as before. Something about how I was wasting my time on other guys when I should be serving him. I don't know how he made another profile, but I didn't care to investigate. I blocked him again. This time, I reported his account, But what really stuck with me was how quickly his entire persona changed. The weird thing is that in the beginning, he seemed so normal. I mean, this could happen to anyone. But after that, I couldn't stop thinking about how dangerous it can be to meet people online. You think you know them, but you really don't. So yeah, that's my story. Honestly, I don't know what would have happened if I'd agreed to meet up with him. I don't even want to think about it. Just be careful out there, guys. Trust your gut. This one still messes with my head every time I think about it. I honestly can't believe it happened, but I need to get it off my chest because it feels like I'm the only one who knows the truth. It's not a truth anyone else should find out the way I did. So, it's this dating app I heard about called Blind Date. It's a little different than most. The catch is you can't see the other person until you meet. You just talk, build some chemistry, and make plans to meet up. At first, it sounded kind of cool to me, like a way to get to know someone without being distracted by looks or photos. It's just about connecting as people. I was kind of skeptical, but I decided to try it out. I set up my profile and waited. After a few days of scrolling through people and sending messages, I got a match. Her name was Est. She was a little older than me, but not by too much. She said she was in her 40s and I was 25 at the time. I thought that was a bit of an age gap, but she seemed cool. She was fun to talk to, easygoing, witty, and shared a lot of the same interests as me. We got into conversations about everything from movies to food to family life. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The weird thing, though, was that she never gave me her full name. She kept saying it was too soon for that. I thought that was strange, but didn't really press it. She told me that when we met, I'd get to know everything about her. I'm not exactly a suspicious person, so I just brushed it off and thought, whatever, maybe she's just shy or a little private. So after chatting for a couple of weeks, we finally agreed to meet up. We decided on a small coffee shop downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet place where we could talk. The day of the meeting, I was feeling a bit nervous, but also curious. I kept imagining who she might be in person, and I even wondered if I'd recognize her once we were face to face. I mean, I'd never seen her photo, so it felt like kind of a weird gamble. I got there a little early and waited at the table. I kept checking my phone, making sure I didn't miss any text from her. I could feel the anxiety building up, and I kept telling myself to relax. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. I'm here, come outside. I stood up, walked up to the front of the cafe, and that's when I saw her. I'm not sure what I expected, but the moment I saw her, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it hit me as soon as I saw her standing there. It was like I knew her, but I couldn't place where or how. She was in a beige coat with her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She was holding a coffee cup, looking at me with a polite but kind of expectant smile. As I got closer, I felt the strangest sense of recognition, like something was about to hit me, but I couldn't quite get it. I said hi, and she smiled warmly. She seemed nice enough, but there was still something in the back of my mind that was bugging me. We went inside, sat down, and started chatting. The conversation felt normal. I couldn't shake that nagging feeling. It was almost like I had seen her face before, somewhere, somehow. I started focusing more on the details of her face, trying to place it. She had these familiar eyes, the way her eyebrows arched, the curve of her smile. It was also unsettlingly familiar, but where had I seen it before? I tried to push it aside and focus on the conversation. She told me that she had 2 kids and had recently gotten divorced. She said she was looking for someone to connect with, someone who wasn't like all the others. I thought she meant her ex-husband, and we started talking about relationships and the challenges of dating at an older age. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. She said something about her kids being at their dad's for the weekend, and I almost froze. I hadn't really processed it at first, but suddenly everything clicked. Her voice, her mannerisms, the way she held herself. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at her, and it took me a second to gather myself. But I had to ask. It was burning in the back of my mind, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I asked her, "Wait, are you my mom?" She froze for a second, just a brief pause, but long enough for me to confirm what I already knew. Her face went blank, and she didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. The whole place felt like it went silent, even though it was busy with other people talking and laughing. Her expression shifted, and she gave me a look. It wasn't the kind of look I was expecting from a stranger. It was a look that only a mother could give. The kind of look that made me feel like I was suffocating. Then she finally spoke, but it wasn't the answer I wanted. She said nothing about the truth. Instead, she just sat there and stared at me for a long moment, not saying a word. I didn't know if I should stand up, scream, or just walk away, but I was too stunned to do anything. I could feel my hands shaking, and my heart was pounding in my chest. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. But then she did something even worse. She tried to play it off like it was no big deal. She made some lame excuse about how she had been looking for something more exciting in her life and wanted to reconnect with someone younger. She didn't even look embarrassed. It was like she was more concerned about her secret than the fact that I had just found out who she really was. I stood up, but my legs felt like jelly. I didn't even know how to process what had just happened. My mother cheating on my dad and meeting me on a dating app like we were strangers. It didn't make any sense. I couldn't even look at her anymore. I just walked out of that cafe, feeling like the world had completely shifted beneath my feet. I was reeling. The whole thing felt like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I don't even know how I got home. My mind was racing. When I got home, I didn't tell my dad. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I still haven't told him. It feels like I'm stuck in some messed up game and I don't know what to do. But I had to share this because it was the most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me. Finding my own mother on a dating app was bad enough, but finding out she was cheating on my dad, that was something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I still don't know if I'll ever confront her. I'm just trying to move on with my life, but every time I think about it, my heart sinks. And I know this is something I'll never forget. So let me tell you about this messed up experience I had with a girl I met on Hinge. I wasn't expecting anything crazy to happen, but man, looking back, I honestly can't believe how naive I was. This one takes the cake for being one of the weirdest and most unsettling things I've ever been through. It all started when I matched with Sandra on Hinge. She seemed really cool at first, way out of my league honestly, but she was nice, funny, and had this vibe like she was down to earth. Her profile was all about fashion, traveling, and living that I'm too cool for school lifestyle. I was into it. She had these super professional looking pictures where she was posing on beaches, sitting on fancy couches in nice places, wearing these high end clothes I couldn't even pronounce the names of. She had that model vibe, but I didn't think much of it. I figured she might be one of those girls who had a side hustle in the fashion world, posting stuff for brands or whatever. We started chatting pretty regularly, nothing out of the ordinary. She'd tell me about her trips, how she loved taking photos, and about her exclusive content that she was trying to build up. At first, I didn't think much of it, but eventually she mentioned that she'd started an OnlyFans account. Don't judge me. I know it's a thing and I didn't think it was a big deal. She even told me she was just getting started and was looking for people to support her content. Honestly, I didn't even blink an eye. I'm not dumb. I get that people do all kinds of things for money, and if she was trying to make it in the influencer world, whatever. Then one day, out of nowhere, she asked me for money. Well, not straight up, but it was clear that's where the conversation was headed. She said she had some special content I could access if I sent her a little support, and I thought, okay, this is weird, but I'll be honest. I was kind of flattered that she was asking me. She said it was exclusive stuff, not the usual Instagram posts, and it would only be available to a few VIP supporters. At first, I was hesitant. I mean, I'm not stupid enough to just throw money at some random person I barely know, but she was really persistent, saying it'd help her grow her brand and that she was grateful for any help. I started to feel a little bad for her, like maybe this was her way of getting a start in a tough world, and she seemed genuine. So I thought, why not? Maybe I'd see what the hype was about. I was literally on the verge of sending her some money when something really odd happened. I was at my buddy's place. We were hanging out and playing video games like we always do, while I showed him Sandra's profile. I thought it was funny, and I wanted his opinion, especially since I had this weird feeling in the back of my head that something wasn't quite right. He took one look at her pictures and froze. He wasn't saying anything, just staring at the screen, and I could tell something was off. So I asked him, "What's up, dude? You good?" He just shook his head, put down his controller, and said, "Bro, that's a famous Russian model." I didn't even know how to react. I laughed thinking he was just joking around, but he was dead serious. He told me to Google her name, and when I did, my stomach sank. I found the same exact pictures, only they weren't hers. It wasn't just some random influencer. It was a model that was all over the place. There were interviews, magazine covers, everything. I was looking at the same person I had been talking to on Hinge. Only, It wasn't her. I started to feel really stupid. Like, how could I not have noticed? How did I fall for this? But the more I looked into it, the worse it got. I started Googling more about her and found that people had been scammed by fake profiles of models like this all the time. They'd set up a fake identity, use stolen photos, and then trick people into giving them money for nothing. Some people even went as far as to build fake relationships and manipulate their victims into thinking they were actually going to meet up. But in reality, they were just after cash. I went through every single message Sandra had sent me, trying to find the red flags I'd missed. I was embarrassed to admit it, but I was pretty close to sending her money. I mean, she'd even started calling me babe and sending sweet messages about how she couldn't wait for us to meet up. The whole thing was building out like a weird romance, and I was genuinely starting to like her. But then I realized none of it was real. I felt so gross. I couldn't believe that I was about to send money to someone who wasn't even real. It was like being in a bad movie where the main character just keeps digging themselves deeper into a hole they can't get out of. And I almost didn't see it in time. I blocked her immediately. But even then, I didn't feel safe. What if she had my personal info? What if she had other profiles out there trying to scam more people? I wasn't sure what to do next. I reported the profile on Hinge, but at that point, I wasn't really sure it would do anything. I thought about reaching out to the actual model whose pictures were being used, but I didn't know where to start. It's not like I wanted to get involved in some international scam investigation or anything. Honestly, though, the most messed up part was how real everything felt. She was so convincing, so sweet at times, and the way she played the game made me feel like I was talking to someone real. I even convinced myself that I might be able to meet her one day, like this wasn't some weird online fantasy. I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling of realizing I almost got taken for a ride. The whole thing was so calculated, so manipulative, and I could tell that this was just one small piece of a bigger scam. It made me realize how much you can fake online, how easy it is to build a persona that doesn't even exist. And that was honestly terrifying. So yeah, lesson learned, I guess. Be careful who you trust on dating apps, especially when they seem too perfect to be true. Okay, so I'm not sure if I even want to share this because it still kind of freaks me out every time I think about it. But I guess that's why I'm doing it. Maybe getting it off my chest will make it feel less real. Anyway, this happened a few months ago, and I hadn't really told anyone about it. But after everything that went down, I think it's worth sharing. So I met this guy, Philip, on Bumble. We'd been chatting for about a week, and honestly, he seemed pretty cool. His profile was a little vague, just a couple of selfies with some basic stuff about liking movies, hiking, and going to concerts. Nothing too crazy. We talked a lot about books and the kind of music we were into, and he seemed chill enough, though a little on the shy side, which I didn't think much of. I'm kind of an introvert myself, so it didn't raise any flags. He asked if I wanted to meet up at a cafe near my place, which sounded fine to me. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I wasn't doing anything else, so why not? I agreed, and we set up a time for around 3 p.m. I showed up a few minutes early, just so I could grab a coffee and have a little time to settle in. The cafe was cute, not too crowded, but still a good spot for a first date. I didn't expect fireworks or anything. I was just hoping for a nice conversation and maybe get to know him a little better. When he walked in, I noticed him immediately. He was a bit taller than I expected, but not much. He looked pretty nervous, like he was already sweating a little even though it wasn't hot. I stood up and waved, and he gave me a shy smile, which was fine. I'm not a big fan of awkward first dates, but I figured it was normal. We hugged when he got close, nothing weird, just a quick, friendly hug. But then it got weird. He didn't let go. At first, I thought maybe he was just holding on a little longer than usual, like maybe he was shy or nervous, and I didn't want to make him feel uncomfortable, so I didn't pull away immediately. But as the seconds went on, he just held on, like he wasn't planning on letting go anytime soon. I started to feel like something was off. I was trying to pull away a little, but his arms stayed locked around me. I didn't know how to handle it. I tried to subtly step back, but he tightened his grip. I kept telling myself, okay, this is just a weird thing. He's shy, it'll pass. But it didn't. The more I tried to pull away, the tighter his hug got, and I could feel his body getting more rigid, like he wasn't even trying to be subtle about it anymore. The awkwardness went from mildly uncomfortable to really uncomfortable. At that point, I was genuinely freaked out. I mean, how long can you stand there, half hugging someone, before it just feels like they're holding you hostage? I started feeling panicked. My chest was getting tight, and I couldn't focus. I wanted to say something, but I wasn't sure how to make it clear that I wasn't okay with this. I'm not the confrontational type, and I didn't want to cause a scene in front of everyone else in the cafe, but it was clear this wasn't just a nervous hug anymore. I gently said his name and tried to move back again, but instead of loosening his grip, he just pulled me closer. I could feel my stomach flip as I started to panic a little more. My mind was racing. I was trapped in this weird situation with a guy I barely knew, and he wouldn't let me go. My brain started screaming, what the hell is happening right now? I finally managed to push him off. I wasn't even thinking, I just kind of shoved him back with both hands on his chest. He didn't resist, but he looked a little surprised, almost hurt, like I had just slapped him. But that was honestly the least of my concerns at that point. I just wanted to get out of there. I backed away, apologized, though I wasn't sure why I was apologizing, and started grabbing my things. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. I just couldn't stay there anymore. I don't even remember how I got my coat on or grabbed my purse, but I made a beeline for the door without looking back. It was like all my instincts were telling me to get as far away from him as possible. I could still feel the tightness of his arms around me, even though I was already out the door. I don't know how long I stood on the sidewalk, trying to calm myself down, but I knew I couldn't go back to that cafe. I texted a friend immediately, telling them what had just happened. The rest of the day was a blur. I didn't want to go home just yet, so I went for a walk to try and shake the weird feeling off. But I couldn't stop thinking about the whole thing. Was I overreacting? Was I just being paranoid? But no, it didn't feel like that. It felt like he was, I don't even know, possessive. Like something in him clicked when I tried to pull away and he didn't want to let go, and it freaked me out. I ended up talking to a couple of my friends about it later that evening, and they all agreed that it was super odd. I mean, they'd been on plenty of first dates, and none of them had experienced anything remotely like that. One of my friends even mentioned that maybe I dodged a bullet. That really stuck with me. What if I had stayed longer? What if I hadn't pushed him off? What would have happened if I hadn't reacted the way I did? The worst part? After I left, Philip texted me a couple of times. The first one was just, sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I'm just a little shy sometimes. And then another one, I hope I didn't freak you out. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I blocked his number and deleted his profile. The whole thing was just too weird, and honestly, it left me feeling really unsettled. So, yeah, that's the story. I know it probably seems like not much happened, but to me, it felt like a close call. I've been on enough dates to know when something's off, and trust me, that was way off. Alright, so I've been debating whether or not to share this for a while, but I figure it might help someone avoid the same weird, borderline creepy situation I found myself in. I can laugh about it now, but trust me, back then I was absolutely freaking out. I met Mason on Tinder. He seemed normal at first, pretty cute, around my age, into hiking, dogs, and low-key stuff like cooking and reading. His profile wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but it was enough to catch my interest. We had a few back and forths on the app, nothing super deep, but light and fun, and I agreed to meet up for coffee one afternoon. It wasn't anything fancy, just a regular first date, right? Yeah, well, turns out I couldn't have been more wrong. When we met, I'll be honest, he seemed exactly like his pictures. Nice smile, good height, dressed casually. But from the second I saw him, I started feeling this weird, uncomfortable vibe. It was like off, but I didn't want to judge him right away. I thought the guy was just being weird. I mean, who doesn't feel a little nervous before a date, right? So we sat down at the coffee shop, got our drinks, and started talking. The conversation was fine at first. He was polite, asked questions about my job, my hobbies, the usual. But then things started getting weird, like unsettling weird. Out of nowhere, he asked me about a dog I used to have, which I hadn't posted about in years. I mean, years. I was taken aback. I didn't really know how to respond, because it was kind of personal, and I hadn't shared anything about my dog on social media or anything. So I just shrugged it off as a coincidence. Maybe he'd seen a picture of it somewhere, right? But then it got worse. As we talked, he started mentioning details about my life that I never ever told him, like the fact that I'd been on a trip to Florida last year, or that I liked a specific type of pizza that wasn't exactly common knowledge. And it wasn't like he was guessing or pulling this stuff out of thin air. He was very specific about it. I started getting a little freaked out trying to figure out how the hell he knew all this about me. I hadn't told him a thing about my trip to Florida. In fact, The only people who knew about it were my close friends and family, but somehow Mason knew. It wasn't just the little details. At one point, he brought up my old high school. He even mentioned my ex from there, and I hadn't talked to that guy in ages. How did he know all this? At this point, my anxiety was kicking in. I was trying to stay calm, but I couldn't shake this feeling that he was watching me, like he knew a lot more than he should. I casually tried to change the subject, but Mason just kept smiling this strange smile, like he knew exactly how to push my buttons. It wasn't the friendly kind of smile, though. It was more of a knowing smile. I didn't like it. My gut was telling me something wasn't right, but I didn't want to cause a scene or make him feel uncomfortable. The weirdness only escalated when he asked me if I wanted to go for a walk afterward. I agreed, mainly because I was trying to keep things light and normal. But the walk was awkward. He kept talking to me like we'd been friends for years, not strangers just meeting for the first time. And here's the thing, he kept referencing things about my life that no one but close people would know. Like when I was upset about losing a job a while back, or how I used to be really into painting. Stuff I barely told anyone. It wasn't just the conversations, though. He was acting possessive. The way he stood too close to me, the way he kept touching my arm when he talked, even though I hadn't invited that. I felt suffocated. He was just too much, you know. There was no personal space. When we got to the park, he even mentioned that he'd seen me around town before, which freaked me out even more. I never saw him around, but apparently he'd seen me a few times in places I frequented. How? Why? Was he following me? Or had he just been watching? Then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, he asked me a question that really made my skin crawl. Hey, so, would it be okay if I stayed over at your place tonight? I'm really tired from the drive, and it's a long ride back. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I mean, we just met. It was one thing to meet up for coffee, but staying at my house. Are you kidding me? I laughed awkwardly at first, thinking maybe he was joking, but no. He was dead serious. He didn't seem embarrassed or awkward about it at all. It was like he expected me to say yes. I immediately tried to backtrack, saying something like, oh, I don't really have anyone over that quickly. But he didn't take the hint. He just smiled again and started talking about how it'd be fine, how we'd have a good time, maybe even watch a movie. He acted like this was a totally normal thing to suggest on a first date. But my mind was racing. Why would you think I'd be okay with that? Why would you even ask? By this point, I was absolutely on edge. My stomach was in knots, and I could feel myself getting more and more uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to just walk away and leave him standing there, but I definitely didn't want him to come home with me. So I made up some excuse about needing to head home early for a family thing, and I started walking away quickly. I didn't even look back. Mason didn't follow me, but I'm still not sure if that was because he realized I wasn't going to entertain his creepy behavior or if he was just playing it cool. Either way, I texted my friend as soon as I was a few blocks away, telling her everything. She didn't even say much, just you gotta block that guy. I did. I blocked him on Tinder and I never heard from him again. But I can't shake the feeling that he knew way too much about me. It still bothers me, honestly. I mean, how did he know all those details about my life? I didn't post half of that stuff online, and I sure as hell didn't tell him. In the end, I realized just how important it is to trust your gut. If something feels off, it usually is. I don't care if you've been talking to someone for weeks. Don't let them make you feel uncomfortable, especially if they're pushing boundaries. I'm just thankful I got away before things got even weirder. And I still can't get over how real this whole thing felt. But yeah, that was the most bizarre Tinder date I've ever been on. And I'm not in a hurry to go on another one anytime soon. I still can't believe this happened. I'm honestly still kind of shocked at how weird it got, and it's been a few months since it all went down. I figured I'd share it here because I can't be the only one who's had a Tinder date turn into a nightmare. So here's the story about Daniel, my super weird sushi date. I met Daniel on Tinder. Honestly, our conversations online were amazing. The chemistry was off the charts. We clicked instantly, talking about music, movies, travel, and just everything. He seemed like a pretty chill guy. He was funny, smart, and we seemed to have the same sense of humor. It was one of those moments when I thought, hey, this might actually go somewhere. We even joked about how easy the conversation was, like we already knew each other. So when he asked me out, I was excited. He suggested sushi, which I'm all about, and I agreed without thinking twice. The day of the date, I was ready. I put on something cute, did my hair, and was feeling good about it. I was actually kind of excited to finally meet this guy I've been chatting with. He picked me up from my apartment and I walked outside to meet him. Now, up until this point, everything had been totally normal. He was punctual, the texting had been great, and I thought this is going to be a fun night. But the second I got in his car, things started to take a weird turn. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was off. Like there was this musky, stale, almost sour scent in the air. I thought maybe he just had a fast food drive-thru or something, but no. It was way worse than that. The car smelled like wet dog and just bad hygiene. I was too polite to say anything at first, thinking it was just a one-off thing. But as I got more settled in the seat, I noticed something even worse. There was dog poop. Yes, actual dog poop, right on the seat where I was supposed to sit. It was on the fabric, and it wasn't a small bit either. It was a decent-sized mess, clearly not cleaned up, and it was fresh. I just froze. I wasn't sure if I was in shock or if I was just trying to understand how this was real life. I mean, come on, how does someone go on a date and not even clean their car first? It wasn't like there was a little speck either. This was a full-on disaster. I tried to hold it together. Maybe he didn't realize it, right? Maybe his dog had an accident and he didn't notice it before picking me up. But then Daniel just casually says, yeah, Guppy had an accident earlier, but he's a poodle, so he's really chill about it. Don't worry, I'll clean it up later. Later, that was his excuse. I mean, come on. He was literally driving me around with fresh dog poop in his car and just didn't care. I was speechless. This was the point where I should have gotten out of the car, but instead I tried to be polite and said I'd just take the bus to the restaurant. I didn't want to make it awkward, but I couldn't deal with that smell or the fact that his dog's poop was chilling in the car. But instead of taking it in stride or just being like, oh, okay, Daniel got weirdly offended, like unreasonably offended. He actually started acting like I was the one who was overreacting. Even though I was the one sitting in a car that smelled like a kennel and had literal dog waste all over the seat. I repeated that I'd just take the bus, but he wouldn't have it. He started getting defensive, saying stuff like, it's just a little poop, come on. Guppy's a great dog, and honestly, all girls are the same, so picky over the smallest stuff. You don't even care about dogs, do you? They're way better than people. I was starting to realize that this was no longer a normal situation. I mean, I get that some people love their dogs, but there's a line, right? I wasn't being picky. I was just grossed out and didn't want to sit in a poop-covered seat. And then it got worse. He just drove off. He didn't even say goodbye or try to apologize for how weird everything had gotten. He just sped off, flipping me off as he did. Like it wasn't enough that I was weirded out by the situation, but now it was also getting this weird aggression thrown at me. As he drove away, he yelled something like, yeah, whatever. Dogs are better than any girl I've met anyway. You're all the same. It was honestly surreal. I stood there for a few seconds, processing what had just happened. He had literally picked me up, driven me to his car, let me sit in dog poop, and then flipped out because I didn't want to be part of it. The whole thing felt like it couldn't be real. Was I on some hidden camera show? Was this a joke? Because it felt like I had just gotten pumped. I stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, my mind racing. I had no idea what just happened, but I was definitely not going to let it ruin my evening. I didn't even care about the sushi anymore. I just wanted to get away from this guy. I called an Uber, got in, and went home. The ride was so awkward and quiet, and I spent the whole time trying to process what had just happened. The worst part, after I got home, I checked my phone and saw a few texts from Daniel. They were all along the lines of him complaining about how girls are never grateful, and how I was just too much of a princess to handle a little dog mess. And the last one. It said, don't worry, I'll find someone who actually appreciates my dog, and not some girl who's too busy being high maintenance to care about the things that matter. I didn't respond, of course. I blocked him on Tinder and even blocked his number because I didn't want to hear any more of his weird rants. I couldn't believe how fast things escalated from, hey, let's grab some sushi to dogs are better than girls. So, yeah, that was my date with Daniel. Honestly, I don't know if it was the weirdest date I've had, but it's definitely up there. I'll never understand why anyone would think it's okay to drive around with dog poop in their car and not care. I definitely learned that no matter how good the chemistry seems online, you got to trust your instincts when you meet up in person. If something feels off, it probably is. In the end, I'm just glad I didn't end up having sushi with a guy who thinks dog poop is just part of the charm. Definitely not my type. Okay, so this is something I never thought I'd be writing about, but it definitely feels like I need to share it. I met Zayn on this Muslim dating app called Salons. I'd never really thought about online dating before, but I figured it couldn't hurt to try something new. I heard some of my friends talk about it, so I figured, why not? Zayn seemed like a nice enough guy. His profile was pretty straightforward. He was polite, respectful, and had a good mix of humor and seriousness in his messages. We had a lot in common, talked about family, religion, and our goals in life. It felt natural, like we were building a friendship before even meeting in person. We chatted for a few weeks before deciding to meet up. Everything up until that point felt pretty normal. Honestly, I was kind of excited, but also a little nervous, like you always are before meeting someone new. I agreed to meet him at this quiet cafe in the city, a place where we could sit and talk without too much distraction. I thought it would be nice, a casual, easy first date. When I arrived, I texted him that I was there. He told me he'd be there in a few minutes. I waited, sipping on my coffee, trying to calm my nerves. And then he walked in. Zayn was exactly like his pictures. Tall, wearing a simple but stylish outfit, and smiling as he walked toward me. He was carrying a bouquet of flowers, which was sweet. I thought, okay, this could be nice. We sat down, and the conversation started off easy. We talked about our families, our jobs, and the usual first date stuff. But then, after about 10 minutes, he did something that immediately made me feel uncomfortable. He said, my aunts and uncles are nearby. They were just curious to see who I was meeting. I thought it was a little odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it's a cultural thing. I don't know. I figured he was just being polite, and it would be fine. But then he said, would you mind if they came over to say hi? I was kind of thrown off. I mean, this was our first date. I didn't even know this guy that well. Why would I be meeting his family on the first date? But I didn't want to come off as rude or awkward, so I tried to brush it off and said it was fine. A few minutes later, his aunt and uncle walked in, both of them in their 40s, both very kind but very interested. They sat down at our table, and it wasn't just like a quick, hey, how are you? Exchange. They sat and started asking me questions about my life, my job, my hobbies, my family. I felt like I was on trial or something. I wasn't prepared for this. Dane sat there, watching me answer all these questions with his smile, almost like he was waiting for my approval from them or something. It was so awkward. And then it got worse. More of his family started showing up. His cousins, his uncle's wife. Basically, all of Zane's extended family came strolling in. At this point, I felt like I was in some kind of weird family reunion, not a first date. It was like I was suddenly on display for everyone to examine. I mean, who does that? Why would anyone bring their whole family to a date? It wasn't like they were just popping in to say hello, no. They were there, sitting at the table, taking part of the conversation, and making me feel like I was being interviewed. I could feel my face getting red, and my mind was just racing, trying to figure out what was going on. Was this normal for them? Was I overthinking it? But the longer I sat there, the more uncomfortable I became. The whole thing felt so off. Zane didn't even seem to notice. He was just sitting there smiling at me, answering questions like everything was completely normal. Meanwhile, his family was discussing my background and my family's traditions. It felt like they were trying to map out my whole life story, all within 30 minutes. At this point, I was ready to leave. I hadn't even had a chance to talk to Zane in private, and it felt like I was being forced into a position where I had to impress his family on the first date. I wasn't even sure if Zane and I had real chemistry, because we were so busy talking about everything except us. I told him I needed to leave. He didn't seem to get it. Instead of understanding that I was feeling uncomfortable, he kept reassuring me that this was normal, that his family just wanted to know who he was meeting, and that this was the way it was done. I declined politely, saying that I wasn't feeling well and needed to head home. Zane tried to insist, but I stood up and said goodbye to everyone. His family was polite, but I could tell they were a little disappointed. As I walked out of the cafe, I was just shaking my head. I didn't know if I should be relieved or annoyed. It wasn't just a first date. It felt like I was auditioning for something I didn't even want to be a part of. Zane texted me as I was heading to my car. He said he was sorry his family made me uncomfortable and that they were just really excited to meet me. But honestly, I wasn't buying it. I don't care how excited your family is. I shouldn't have had to meet them on the first date. I blocked him after that. I know it might sound harsh, but I don't think he ever got it. To him, it probably seemed normal, but I didn't want to be with someone whose first instinct was to bring all their relatives along like it was a new product on a shelf they wanted to inspect. It wasn't fair to me, and I felt like my boundaries had been completely ignored. The whole experience left me feeling drained and confused. I mean, I get that family is important, but you don't bring your entire family to meet someone on the first date. That's just not how it works. Looking back, I don't think Cindy was a bad person, but we definitely weren't on the same page, and that's okay. But I definitely learned the hard way that some things are better kept between two people until you really know each other. Meeting your partner's family that early, that's a red flag. So yeah, that was my weird and uncomfortable date with Zane. If there's anything I learned, it's that some cultural norms just don't vibe with me. And sometimes it's okay to walk away from something that feels off, even if everyone else thinks it's fine. Okay, I don't even know where to begin with this one. It was honestly one of the weirdest and most unsettling things that's ever happened to me. I'm still trying to figure out how it all went so wrong, but I guess I should start from the beginning. I met Juliana on Facebook. She messaged me out of the blue one day, saying she had seen my profile through some mutual friends and thought I seemed cool. She told me she was a refugee from Ukraine, that she'd been in the country for a little while, and that things had been tough for her. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone has a story, right? I'm not going to turn someone away just because they're going through a hard time, especially not someone who's been through what she had. So we started chatting. She seemed really sweet, and we quickly fell into an easy flow of conversation. She didn't ask for anything, just talked about her life back in Ukraine, how hard it was for her and her family, and how grateful she was to be safe here. She told me a lot about the war, how it had destroyed everything she knew, and I felt bad for her. She wasn't begging for help or anything, just sharing her story. I started feeling like I could maybe do something nice for her, like give her some comfort after everything she'd been through. After a few weeks of chatting, she suggested we meet up. She was in my city, and we decided to grab a coffee at a little cafe downtown. When I got there, I was nervous. I had never met anyone online, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I got there early, so I was just sitting around, people watching, and trying to calm myself down. I was wondering if maybe she would look different than how she did in her photos. But when she walked in, I recognized her right away. She was exactly how she looked in the pictures, maybe a little more tired, but still pretty. She smiled at me, and I waved. She walked over and immediately hugged me. Now, I'm a pretty touchy-feely person, but it threw me off a little. It was just a lot, you know. She had this intensity to her that I wasn't prepared for. I shrugged it off, though. People have different ways of saying hello, right? Maybe it was a cultural thing. We sat down, and she didn't waste any time. As soon as we got our drinks and sat down, she started talking. And I'm not talking about small talk or anything. No, it was straight to the point, and I wasn't ready for it. She looked at me with these big, intense eyes and said, "So, would you be willing to marry me tomorrow?" I stared at her, blinking, thinking I'd misheard her. She said it again. "I need to stay in the country, and I need someone to marry me. You seem like a good person. I'm not asking for anything more than that. Just a marriage on paper." I swear, I almost choked on my coffee. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like she had eased into the topic. There was no lead up, no gradual conversation about our feelings or compatibility. Just, "Hey, marry me tomorrow." I froze for a second, trying to wrap my head around it. I asked her why she needed to get married so quickly, and she went into this whole thing about her visa status. Apparently, she was on some temporary visa, and it was about to expire. If she didn't get married to someone from here, she'd have to go back to Ukraine, and she didn't want that. She said that she wasn't trying to scam me or anything, just needed a paper marriage so she could stay. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for helping people I can, but this was way over the line. Marrying someone because their visa is expiring. I wasn't sure if I should be flattered or terrified. I tried to let her down easy, telling her that I wasn't ready for that kind of commitment, especially not after just meeting in person. I explained that I didn't think it was something I could do, that it didn't feel right to me. But as soon as I said no, things got strange. Her face went from warm and hopeful to almost angry. She immediately stood up, knocking over her cup in the process, and started pacing. It was like a switch flipped. She started ranting about how I was ruining her life, how I was the only one who could help her, and how all men were the same. She said I was just another selfish person who didn't care about the struggles of others. She went on and on about how I had a chance to be a hero, to help someone in need, and I was just turning it down like it was nothing. I wasn't expecting her to react like this at all. I thought she'd take it as a no, and maybe we'd awkwardly finish our coffee and part ways. But no, she was completely spiraling. She told me that if I didn't marry her, she'd be sent back to a war zone, and it would be all my fault. She wasn't even asking for money or anything, just this one thing. One simple thing in her eyes. I was starting to get uncomfortable. She was starting to get louder, and I was looking around, wondering if people were going to notice. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I didn't know what to do. I tried to calm her down, but it was clear she wasn't hearing anything I said. She just kept blaming me for her demise, and it was starting to feel really intense. I realized I had to leave. This wasn't going anywhere good, and I wasn't getting married to anyone, especially not under these circumstances. I stood up, excused myself, and started walking toward the door. As I left, she shouted after me, calling me heartless and selfish, but I didn't look back. I'm not sure what happened after that. I blocked her on Facebook, and she never tried to reach out again. But I still think about it sometimes. How did things get that far? How could someone be so desperate and aggressive? It's one thing to ask for help, but it was the way she flipped on me that freaked me out. To this day, I have no idea if she was really a refugee or if there was something else going on. I just know I wasn't going to be the one to make that kind of decision for someone else's life. I'm all for helping people when I can, but that was way beyond my ability to help. It's a pretty messed up situation, and I can't believe it happened. I'll never forget how fast things went from a nice coffee date to me feeling like I was caught in a weird, uncomfortable trap. I swear, I don't know what's worse, the fact that it happened or the fact that I still don't really know how to explain it. Sometimes I think about deleting Tinder just to be safe, but I guess I'm just trying to push past it. Anyway, here's what happened. It started out pretty normal. I've been on Tinder for a couple of months, mostly for casual chats and a few dates here and there. I wasn't looking for anything serious at the time, just trying to meet some new people. I wasn't one of those people who spends hours on the app, swiping left and right like it's a full-time job. But I check it once in a while, nothing too crazy. One night, I was lying in bed, scrolling through the app when I saw a match. His profile seemed pretty standard. Pictures were decent, looked like he had a good sense of humor based on his bio. He was cute, so I swiped right. We started chatting, and honestly, it felt pretty normal. We had a little back and forth about music, movies, and random stuff. I didn't think much of it at first. But then, after a few days of talking, things started to feel weird. At first, it was small stuff. He asked questions that didn't really make sense in the context of the conversation, like he already knew the answers. I didn't really think about it at first. People ask random questions sometimes, right? But then it started happening more frequently. One day, I mentioned something about a concert I had gone to a few months ago, and suddenly he was asking about specific details about it, like the set list. I hadn't posted about it on social media, so it felt weird that he would know that. I brushed it off, assuming maybe he was just being creepy in a harmless way. I mean, it wasn't that weird, right? People talk about stuff all the time, and sometimes I just assumed he remembered it from earlier chats. But the vibe was off. And then it escalated. One night, I was talking to him, just normal stuff, when he suddenly messaged me saying, "I know who you are. I've seen you before." My stomach dropped. At first, I thought maybe it was just some weird pickup line, or maybe he was joking around. I mean, I didn't exactly have any reason to think I was known by anyone from Tinder. I didn't post anything that personal, just a few pictures and some generic stuff about my hobbies. But after that message, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The messages kept coming in, and every time I would try to change the subject, he would keep pushing it. He'd mention the name of my street, which I definitely never told him, and small details about my family, like where my sister worked or what my dad did for a living. He'd even mention random stuff about people I knew, stuff I had never posted online, stuff that, unless you were in my life, you couldn't possibly know. I told myself it was just a coincidence, or maybe even that he had found my social media accounts through mutual friends or something. But then it got weirder. One night, I was having a pretty chill evening at home, lying in bed with my phone when I got another message from him. It was about an event that happened a couple of years ago. I had mentioned something about a local event that happened and how my friends and I had gone, but he didn't just mention it. He described everything about that night. He mentioned exactly what I wore, who I went with, and even where we had gotten pizza after. He described things I hadn't even told anyone, things I thought had just slipped my mind. That's when I realized this wasn't just some random coincidence anymore. This guy was keeping track of my life somehow, and he was using Tinder as a way to freak me out. I tried to block him. I really did. But he just kept coming back. He created new profiles, messaged me from different accounts, and all of them had the same weird tone to them. They were almost like a twisted game, like he was trying to get inside my head. The messages would be normal, but then would take a sharp turn into unsettling territory. He would ask about things I hadn't posted anywhere. He even started mentioning my old school, the places I used to hang out, things that, again, only people from my life would know. That's when I got seriously freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I tried Googling his name, checking his profile on Tinder, but everything seemed like a dead end. He didn't have any real social media accounts, at least not under his name. The only thing that stood out was how ordinary he seemed. Like, his profile had enough pictures, but nothing that stood out. No friends in common, no unusual clues. Just bland. I started wondering if he had somehow gotten a hold of my personal info. Did he hack into my social media or something? But the more I thought about it, the more confused I got. There was no way. I was pretty careful about what I shared online, so how was he knowing these things? A week after the messages started getting more intense, I was at the store picking up some groceries when I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out to check it, and there it was, another message from him. This time the message was short, but terrifying. It said, "I see you. I'm watching you right now." My heart dropped. My palms went cold, and I almost dropped my phone. I immediately turned around and walked toward the exit. I had no idea who he was or if he was really watching me, but the idea that someone could be that close and know where I was without me ever telling them felt like a nightmare. That was the last straw. I deleted Tinder, changed my phone number, and tightened up my privacy settings across every social media account I had. I never saw that guy again, but I still think about it. Every time I get a new message from a stranger or someone who seems a little too interested in my life, my heart skips a beat. It's like my brain is constantly waiting for something else to happen, even though nothing has since. I have no idea how he knew so much about me, or if he was stalking me or just getting lucky with information. Either way, it still feels like I'm being watched sometimes. And the worst part is, I'll never know how much of what he said was true, and how much was just part of his weird, messed up game. So, I'm not sure if I'm cursed or just really bad at picking dates, but after what happened with Tyrone, I seriously questioned ever using Tinder again. I've had a few weird dates in the past, but this one takes the cake for the most bizarre and frustrating thing to ever happen to me. I met Tyrone on Tinder. His profile was pretty chill, just the usual stuff. Pictures of him at parties, a couple of shots of him at the gym, the obligatory outdoorsy hiking pics. He seemed pretty funny in his messages too. We hit it off almost immediately, which is rare to be honest. Most of my Tinder convos are either awkward or fizzle out after a few exchanges, but with him, it felt like we had some real chemistry. After chatting for a couple of days, he suggested we meet up for dinner at a restaurant near my place. I thought it was a good idea, nothing too fancy, but a solid spot. Plus, I was hungry, and the food there is pretty good. So I agreed. The day of the date came, and I was actually excited. He seemed cool online, and we had been talking pretty easily. I got ready, put on something cute but not too over the top, and headed out to the restaurant. When I got there, Tyrone was already sitting at a table by the window. He stood up when I walked in, and he looked exactly like his pictures. Tall, fit, and had this charming smile. We exchanged some pleasantries, sat down, and ordered drinks. At first, the date was fine. We talked about everything, our jobs, hobbies, our favorite movies, random funny stories. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was nice. Then we ordered food. I got the steak, and he ordered a seafood pasta. Everything was normal, I thought. But then things started getting weird. After we ate, Tyrone told me he needed to use the bathroom. Totally normal, right? People go to the bathroom all the time. I wasn't suspicious at all. He gets up, walks away, and I start scrolling through my phone, just checking messages and wasting time. About 10 minutes go by, and I figured he's taking his time in the bathroom, or maybe got caught up in some conversation with the staff. But then 15 minutes go by. Still no sign of him. I start looking around, wondering if he's maybe talking to someone else or just hanging out. At this point, I'm starting to feel a little awkward. I mean, I'm sitting here alone in the middle of a restaurant with my food half finished, and I can't help but think, what's going on? Did he leave? Is he coming back? I tried calling him a couple of times, but it went straight to voicemail. My mind is running through all these scenarios and none of them seem normal. 20 minutes. Nothing. I call the waiter over and ask if they've seen a guy named Tyrone. She gives me this confused look but says she hasn't seen anyone by that name. Now I'm starting to get seriously uncomfortable. Is he just ditching me? I mean, I'm sitting here thinking there's no way he'd just get up and leave, right? But then I notice something. His phone. It's sitting on the table. I didn't really think much of it at first, but it's definitely his phone. It's the same one I saw in his pictures. My stomach drops. At this point, I'm feeling a combination of anger and confusion. Did he seriously just walk out and leave me to pay for both meals? That's literally the worst move. I mean, I've heard of people pulling some messed up stunts on dates, but this was something else entirely. I waited for a few more minutes just in case he came back, but after half an hour I gave up. I didn't want to be the one sitting in the restaurant looking like an idiot, waiting for a guy who had already made up his mind to ditch me. So I did what any normal person would do when left alone with their meal and an unpaid check. I called the waiter over and told her I was going to pay for my meal and leave. She looks at me kind of oddly but doesn't say anything. She walks off to grab the check, and when she comes back she mentions, the gentleman paid for both meals before he left. My jaw hit the floor. Tyrone had paid for both of our meals and then just bounced. He didn't say goodbye, he didn't leave a note, nothing. He literally disappeared into thin air. He'd even taken the time to leave a tip for the waiter. I'm sitting there totally stunned. I'm trying to piece this together. Was he just trying to avoid me? Was he uncomfortable and didn't know how to handle it? Or was there something deeper going on? I have no idea. Honestly, I was fuming. I felt like I'd been played. It wasn't even just about him leaving without saying anything. It was the fact that he took my time, got my hopes up, and then just vanished. Who does that? When I got home, I checked my phone again. I had a couple of texts from him, but I didn't want to read them. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to hear any excuse he had. I didn't even bother replying. That was the last time I ever heard from Tyrone. I looked back at our Tinder conversations to see if there was anything that stood out, anything that could have prepared me for what happened, but there was nothing. Everything seemed fine, until it wasn't. I'm still honestly baffled by what happened. Maybe it was a weird social experiment, or maybe he was just a jerk. But one thing's for sure, I won't be falling for a dine and dash date again. Some people seriously have no chill. So I met this girl on a dating app. Freya. Super cute, really chill in her profile, told me she liked hiking, indie music, and had a thing for the outdoors. She wasn't one of those girls who had every inch of her life plastered on Instagram, which was kind of refreshing, honestly. Just a normal girl, at least that's what I thought. We had been talking for a couple of weeks before finally setting up an actual date. It felt like we had good chemistry, you know. She wasn't pushy, and she actually seemed interested in getting to know me, not just looking for a free dinner. So we agreed on a local bar, nothing too fancy, but just enough for a first meetup. The night of the date, I show up a little early trying to play it cool. I grab a drink, scope out the place, and wonder if she's going to be anything like the picture in my head. Freya walks in about 10 minutes later, wearing this simple but cute outfit, her hair up in a messy bun, looking all casual but somehow still glowing. She had this vibe like she was comfortable in her own skin, which honestly is pretty rare these days. She looks exactly like her pictures, but still, there's this feeling I get when she walks toward me. Something's off, but I brush it off. We talk for a while, and it's good. I mean, it's really good. We talk about work, our hobbies, our favorite books, our dumbest childhood moments. At some point, she mentions her fiancé, and that kind of catches me off guard. Not because she's already engaged. Some people move fast, whatever. But because, well, I swear she never mentioned a fiancé before. I double check the text when she goes to the bathroom, and nope, there's nothing in there about a fiancé. She talked about her family, her love of hiking, her road trip to the Grand Canyon, but not one mention of being in a relationship, let alone engaged. But maybe I misheard. Maybe she was just talking about her best friend or something. I don't know. I let it slide and focus on the date. We finish our drinks, and she asks if I want to grab some food after. At this point, I'm just going with the flow, but in the back of my mind, I can't shake this weird feeling about the fiancé thing. Like, why wouldn't she mention that sooner? The date ends on a good note, and she kisses me on the cheek. It was sweet, nothing crazy, but I can't stop thinking about the fiancé comment. whenever I tell myself, I'm not about to dwell on it. It was just a weird slip-up. People are weird sometimes, right? Flash forward to a few weeks later, and it's work party time. I work at a tech company, pretty chill environment, lots of laid-back events. The whole office was getting together at this place downtown for drinks, snacks, and the usual awkward small talk. I didn't think anything of it until I show up and see Freya standing in the corner of the room, talking to one of the project managers. And who's this guy she's chatting with? It's my coworker, Jeff. I'd seen Jeff around the office for a couple of years now. Tall, always wearing these tacky button-down shirts with a tie that's just a bit too tight. We don't really talk much, but he's the type of guy who's always around, making sure people know his name, Just one of those dudes. Anyway, he's talking to Freya, and my brain just stops for a second. Wait, what? She looks really comfortable with him, like too comfortable. It's one of those moments where you don't even have to think too hard about it. You just know something's going on. I walk over to grab a drink, trying to pretend like I didn't notice anything. The whole time I can't help but keep an eye on them. They're laughing, leaning in close, and that gut feeling I had about Freya's fiancé. It's coming back in full force. It's all I can think about now. I start piecing things together. They're not just talking. They're too familiar with each other. Eventually, I can't stand it anymore. I walk over and ask Jeff if he's seen the other team leave on a project. Just a random excuse to get close. As soon as I do, I see Jeff's face light up. He turns to Freya, grins, and introduces her. "Oh, you haven't met my fiancé, Freya," he says, and my blood just runs cold. Fiancé? The fiancé I heard about on the date. I freeze. I try to play a cool smile, but inside, everything is unraveling. She's his fiancé, the girl I've been talking to for weeks. The girl I went on a date with hell. Freya looks at me, and I see it, a flash of recognition in her eyes. A split second of something that might as well have been guilt. She puts on this sweet smile, but it's way too fake, too rehearsed. She says something like, "Oh, wow, small world. Didn't know you two worked together. Yeah, no kidding." I'm standing there trying to keep my composure, trying to think of something to say, but my brain is just fried at this point. Jeff keeps going on about some new project he's leading, completely oblivious to the tension building up between the three of us. And I can't even focus on anything he's saying. My thoughts are racing, and I feel like I'm stuck in a bad episode of a reality show. How did she even think she could get away with this? Why did she lie? Was she always planning to do this? I don't even know. After a while, I just decide to get out of there. I tell Jeff I need to step outside for a second. He's all, "Yeah, sure, man, take a breather," as if everything's totally normal. I walk to the nearest exit, and I just stand there for a few minutes, trying to wrap my head around everything that just happened. My mind is just racing with questions. Why did she go out with me? Why wouldn't she tell me about Jeff? Was it some weird game? How long had she been seeing both of us? I don't have answers. I'm just left standing there in the cold night air, staring at the ground, feeling more like an idiot than I ever have in my life. And that was it. That was the last time I ever spoke to Freya. I never even texted her. I deleted her number the second I got home. The whole thing felt like some messed up joke. I still see Jeff at work sometimes, but things are weird. He doesn't know that I know, and I don't really want to tell him. He's not the type of guy I'd even want to get involved with over something like this. Anyway, I guess this is just a cautionary tale, or whatever. Don't get too caught up in what you see on dating apps. People lie, and some lies, they come back to bite you. So I went on this date with a guy named Roy. At first, everything seemed totally normal. He seemed nice enough, a little quirky, but nothing red flaggy. He had this whole surprise thing planned for our first date, which honestly sounded kind of fun, even if it was a little strange. He didn't tell me exactly where we were going, but he said I'd like it, so I was all in. It wasn't like I had a packed schedule or anything. Roy picked me up, and we started driving out of the city. The further we went, the more it started to feel like we were heading to some random spot in the middle of nowhere. We were going into the mountains, super beautiful, but I'm not exactly a nature girl. Still, I figured it'd be fine. I mean, how bad could it be, right? Eventually, we stopped at this random trailhead by the side of the road. There was no one else around, just trees and the sound of wind in the air. Roy jumps out of the car like he's been here a million times, throwing on a backpack and looking all ready for an adventure. I, on the other hand, have absolutely no idea what I'm getting into. I wasn't dressed for hiking or anything, just wearing sneakers and some random jeans, which felt like the worst decision ever as soon as I stepped out of the car. But hey, he said it'd be fun, so I just rolled with it. Roy starts talking about how the trail's pretty easy, nothing too intense, and we're just going to enjoy the view. He says it's a great spot for beginners and that we'll be back down in no time. He even mentions that there's a bear or two in the area, but not to worry, they're usually harmless. That should have been my first warning sign, but at the time I was just thinking about the pretty views and how he seemed to know what he was doing. We start walking, and at first it's fine. The air is crisp, the trees are lush, and I'm trying to keep up with him, even though I'm not exactly built for mountain trails. But after about 15 minutes, I start realizing that Roy is walking way too fast for me. He's practically jogging, and I'm starting to lag behind. I keep telling myself that it's fine, that I'm just out of shape, but the further we go, the more I'm struggling to keep up. Roy doesn't even look back. He's just powering ahead, and it's getting a little uncomfortable. I keep telling myself it's no big deal. I'll catch up. But as we go deeper into the woods, I can't ignore the feeling that something's off. He's still so far ahead of me, and I'm starting to get a little winded. My legs are burning from trying to move fast on these uneven rocks and dirt. It feels like he's purposely not slowing down, like I'm being left behind. At this point, I'm starting to feel a little stupid for not speaking up. I'm not the type to complain, but I should have said something earlier. Then it hits me. I don't really know where I'm going anymore. The trail is barely marked, and I've just been following his footprints for the last half hour trying to catch up. At some point, I stop and look around, realizing how much more isolated I feel. There's no sound except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. My heart starts pounding in my chest. I'm on my own with no phone signal. I have no idea how far we've come. It's a little freaky, but I keep telling myself to calm down. I keep moving, but Roy's nowhere in sight. I start to pick up the pace, thinking he might have stopped somewhere. But the more I walk, the more I realize how lost I'm getting. I don't know the direction anymore. I don't know if I'm even on the same trail. My breath's coming quicker now, and my legs are killing me, but I push on. That's when I hear it. The rustling. At first, I think it's just another animal, maybe a deer or something, but then it gets louder. Too loud. I freeze. The sound is coming from the trees just off the trail. I stand still, hoping it's nothing, maybe just a branch or some other animal. But then I see it, a huge black shape moving between the trees. My stomach drops. A bear. It's standing there, about 30 feet away, and it's not moving, just watching me. I'm pretty sure my heart stops beating for a second. I've never seen a bear in the wild before, and I'm not about to stick around to see how it reacts. Instinct kicks in. I turn and run. My mind is just screaming at me to get out of there. I don't even care about being quiet. I don't care about anything except putting as much distance between myself and that bear as possible. I don't know how long I've been running, but I don't stop. My legs feel like they're going to give out at any second. I can hear the bear moving behind me, but I don't dare look back. Every time I think I might be outrunning it, I hear another snap of a twig or a low growl. I'm in full panic mode now. I don't know if I'm even on the trail anymore. But I just keep running, hoping I'll see some sign of life, some indication that there are people nearby. I don't even care about Roy at this point. I just want to survive. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, I burst through the trees and stumble into an open area. I don't know where I am, but I'm out of the woods and the bear isn't following me. My chest is heaving and my legs are shaking. But I keep moving slowly at first, then faster as I realize I might not be completely safe yet. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting the bear to show up again, but it never does. After a while, I spot a small cabin up ahead, some kind of ranger station or shelter. I don't even care. I make a beeline for it and bang on the door until someone answers. I'm a mess, out of breath, sweating and shaking like a leaf, but I don't care. I'm just so glad to be out of the woods. The ranger at the door takes one look at me and immediately lets me in. He doesn't ask too many questions, just tells me to sit down and calm down. As I catch my breath, I realize something. Roy. I've totally forgotten about him. I have no idea where he is, or if he even noticed I was missing. The more I think about it, the more I realized he never looked back, never checked on me. He probably didn't even know I was lost until I ran into the bear. I can't even process that. I should have realized something was off when he was speeding ahead of me, leaving me in the dust. I never heard from Roy again after that. I didn't even try to reach out. I don't think I ever will. Maybe he just didn't care, or maybe it was all some messed up game to him. Either way, I'll never forget that hike. If you're ever out on a date and the guy plans a surprise that includes you getting lost in the woods alone, don't trust it. Trust me. So this one's a bit of a mess. You know how you get those matches on dating apps where everything seems cool at first, and you think, all right, this could go somewhere, but then it just doesn't. Yeah, this is one of those stories. I matched with Kelly on this dating app, and we've been talking for a few days. She was cute, seemed chill, into the same kind of stuff I was, like concerts, hikes, the usual. I figured, why not, let's meet up. She suggested we go to this bar downtown, pretty low key, nothing too fancy. I was down for it. I'm not picky when it comes to first dates. I just wanted to get to know her. We meet at the bar, and at first, everything's going okay. She's friendly, we're laughing about some dumb stuff we've both done, like bad tattoos and embarrassing moments from high school. I'm thinking this is going great. But then about 20 minutes in, she orders her first drink. Cool, whatever. A drink is normal, right? But then she orders another one, and then another one. It's like she just started going off the rails with this never-ending cycle of drinks. By drink number 4, I start noticing she's talking a little more loudly than before, and her face is getting red. I don't know if I'm the one who's out of touch with alcohol culture or if she's just used to drinking a lot, but it's starting to feel off. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe she was just a little nervous or something. But as she knocked back another round, I could tell she was getting drunker by the second. She was starting to lean in closer, talking louder, and just acting a lot less, well, normal. She was all over the place, laughing hysterically at things that weren't even that funny, slurring her words, and looking at me like she'd just discovered fire or something. The weird thing was, I wasn't even sure if she realized how far gone she was. She didn't seem to have any self-awareness about it. It wasn't like she was trying to act cute or playful either. She just seemed lost. She couldn't even finish a sentence without getting distracted by something else, like a random person walking by or the lights on the ceiling. It was like I wasn't even there anymore. At some point, she started touching my arm. Nothing too weird, just casual stuff, but she kept doing it over and over. I wasn't uncomfortable at first, but by drink number 6, yes, 6, she was getting way too handsy. Like, every time I moved my arm, she'd grab it again and lean in too close. It was starting to feel like she wasn't just tipsy anymore, she was kind of losing it. She looked at me with these wide, glassy eyes and kept telling me how much she liked me, how great the night was, and how she couldn't believe how fun I was. I wasn't sure if this was just the alcohol talking or if she genuinely felt that way, but I was getting kind of uncomfortable. At one point, she just lunged at me. Not in a cute, playful way, but like she was a little too focused on trying to kiss me. I wasn't prepared for it. She kind of just threw herself at me, and I pulled back instinctively. And that's when it all went downhill. She didn't take the rejection well. I'm not talking about a little pout or awkward moment. She lost it. Like full on went from being this weird drunk flirt to screaming at the top of her lungs. I have no idea what happened, but she just started yelling. Not at me, but at the bar, at the people around her, at the world. She was pointing at random people, shouting things I couldn't even make sense of. It was like the entire bar turned to look at us, and she didn't care. She was just going off, saying stuff that didn't make sense. I'm standing there, absolutely frozen. I've never been in a situation like this. I've seen people get a little tipsy, but nothing like this. She was acting like she had completely lost touch with reality. Some guy from the bar even came over to see if everything was okay, and Kelly started screaming at him too. I wasn't sure if he was trying to help or if he was just trying to get her to chill out, but at that point, I just knew I needed to get out of there. I tried to back away slowly, hoping she'd settle down, but she wouldn't stop following me. She was trying to drag me back to the booth we'd been sitting at, like she didn't even realize she was being a complete mess. She was pulling at my arm, saying things like, "Come on, baby, just stay." But it was so aggressive, so not what I signed up for. I can't even explain how surreal it felt. I've been on bad dates before, but nothing that made me feel unsafe or like I was just in the middle of some chaotic scene that I had no idea how to get out of. The bartender even gave me a look like, "Are you seriously going to deal with this?" So I did what anyone in their right mind would do. I bolted. I didn't even say goodbye. I just grabbed my coat, slipped out the door, and kept walking. I didn't even care if she was still screaming behind me. I just wanted out. I stood outside for a minute just trying to breathe. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. I mean, one minute we were laughing about dumb things, and the next, I'm running away from this girl who's gone full-blown crazy in front of a room full of strangers. I called an Uber, got home, and just sat there in disbelief. I didn't even text her, didn't feel like explaining myself. She had my number, but I didn't want to deal with it. And that was the end of it. Never heard from her again, and honestly, I'm not mad about it. I can't say it was a lesson learned because there's no real lesson to be learned here. Just be careful who you meet online, I guess. People can go from totally normal to totally out of control in a second. And sometimes you really don't know what you're getting into until you're already in it. Anyway, that's the story. Just thought I'd share. Alright, so I'm still processing everything that happened. And honestly, I'm still kind of freaked out. This story is a little out there, and it's one of those you won't believe me unless I show you kinds of things. So here goes. I met this guy on a dating app named Walter. He was fine. He wasn't my usual type, but whatever. We had some decent conversations, shared some funny memes, and after a few days, we decided to meet up for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a casual place that had decent food and a relaxed vibe. It was supposed to be a chill date, just getting to know each other, no big deal. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at the table with a nervous smile. I can't really describe him, other than that he looked a little scruffy, kind of like someone who just rolled out of bed, but still managed to look okay. Not bad looking, but nothing that made me go, oh wow, this guy's amazing. He was nice though, polite, kind of awkward, but I like that. I'm not into cocky dudes or whatever, so we start talking, and it's all going all right. The conversation flows pretty well. We laugh about random stuff, and I think, okay, this could work. After about an hour, we're finishing up our meal and feeling good about it. Then Walter says he's going to pay, so he grabs the check. Fine by me. He pulls out his wallet and starts looking around for his card. I don't think much of it at first, but then something catches my eye. I notice the wallet. It wasn't anything special, just a plain black leather one, but for some reason it looked really familiar. It's the kind of thing you don't usually pay attention to, but I did. I don't know why. Maybe it was the shape, or just the way he was holding it. Whatever the reason, it made me pause for a second. He fumbles with the wallet, takes out a card, and starts tapping it on the table, probably to get it out of the holder. And that's when I saw the last 4 digits of the card. The exact same 4 digits as the car I had lost a week ago. I couldn't believe it. I felt my stomach drop into my feet. I didn't say anything right away, but I couldn't stop staring at those numbers. I knew those digits, I knew them. It took me a second, but I instantly realized what had happened. A week ago, I'd been out with friends at a bar, and I must have dropped my card somewhere. I had no idea where it went. I tried calling my bank, and I canceled and ordered a new one. But I never found the old card. And now here I was, sitting across from a guy I barely knew, watching him pay with the exact same card I thought I'd lost forever. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Was he the one who took it? Was he using my card all week? I tried to play it cool, not wanting to make a scene, but inside I was freaking out. I couldn't help myself. I had to know for sure. I needed to check to confirm what I was already starting to feel in my gut. I looked at the wallet again. That plain black wallet. It wasn't just any wallet. It had this little worn patch on the side, a small tear near the stitching. I had the same exact wallet before it got messed up, and I remembered the tear. Now I was sure. The wallet, the card, the last 4 digits. It was all adding up. He had to have my old card. But why? How had it ended up with him? Did he take it? Was he just some random guy using a stolen card to impress me? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't just ignore it. I decided to ask him. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I could feel the anger and confusion bubbling up inside me. I didn't want to accuse him outright, but I needed answers. I asked him where he'd gotten the card. As soon as the words left my mouth, his face went pale. His hand froze, still holding the card in the air. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. There was this moment of complete silence where neither of us said anything. The room seemed too quiet. I watched him, trying to figure out if he was lying or if he was genuinely freaked out. But then, just as quickly as the silence hit, he started acting weird, shifting in his seat, looking around the restaurant like he was trying to figure out what to do. And then, just as I was about to say something else, he stood up. He grabbed his wallet, shoved it into his jacket pocket, and backed away from the table. I was still sitting there, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. He didn't even give me a chance to ask more questions. He just bolted. I sat there for a moment, not sure if I should get up and chase him or just sit there, confused and pissed off. I looked at the table, still holding on to the card I had just seen. And then it hit me, he didn't even pay for the meal. He didn't leave a tip, didn't sell the bill. He just ran. I had no idea what to do next. I felt totally lost. I didn't even know what I was supposed to feel. Angry, scared, confused. Maybe all of it. I couldn't believe this was happening. I had literally just sat across from a guy who had stolen my card and tried to pass it off as his own, acting all normal until the moment I caught on. Now he was gone. I was stuck trying to piece this whole thing together in my head. I stayed at the table for a minute trying to calm myself down. I wasn't sure if I should call the cops or what, but I definitely wasn't going to let it slide. This wasn't just a bad date anymore. It was straight up theft. I ended up talking to the manager, telling him the situation. They checked the security footage and confirmed what I already knew. Walter had definitely used my card, and the wallet was mine too. They gave me the option to call the police, but honestly, by the time they figured everything out, Walter was long gone. I don't really know what Walter's deal was. I don't know if he was just desperate or if he thought I wouldn't catch on. But honestly, I'm just glad I noticed. It's one of those things that felt surreal while it was happening. Like, is this really my life right now? Am I really sitting here with a stolen credit card in front of me, trying to make sense of what just went down? I still haven't heard from him. I blocked him right after everything happened, and I haven't been on any dating apps since. Maybe I'll go back to them eventually, but I think I'm going to double check everything next time. But yeah, that was my date with Walter. I guess some people just can't be trusted. So this is one of the strangest dating experiences I've had. I still don't know how to even process it, to be honest. I thought it was gonna be a chill thing, but instead, it was like walking into a horror movie. It started off normal, but what happened a few weeks in left me seriously questioning everything. I met Lisa on a dating app, your typical swiping situation. She was cute, a little quirky, into hiking, art, and all the usual stuff that made me think, yeah, let's meet up. We had a couple of dates, and honestly, things were going fine. We went to dinners, grabbed coffee, talked about life, laughed a lot. She seemed sweet, a little bit shy, but in a fun way. I had no red flags, nothing that felt off. Honestly, I was starting to think it might be something real. A couple of weeks in, Lisa started talking a bit more seriously about the future, which I thought was normal, right? Everyone talks about what they want eventually. Kids, careers, stuff like that. But then one night, out of nowhere, she just drops this bomb. She asked me when I was going to buy her a ring. I didn't really understand what she meant at first, so I kind of laughed it off, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She was dead serious. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just one of those weird, over-the-top things people sometimes say when they're feeling pressure, but after that, she started asking about it more and more. Like she'd casually drop it into conversation like, oh, so are you planning on getting me a ring? Or, I'm not getting any younger, you know. I'll be real, I wasn't even thinking about that. We were dating, yeah, but we were still getting to know each other. I was about to be picking out engagement rings after only a couple of weeks, but every time we hung out, it felt like it was becoming more of an expectation. Like she was waiting for me to propose, but why? I barely knew her family. I didn't even know if we were in the same headspace about what we wanted long term, but she kept making it clear that she wanted a ring and soon. I didn't know how to respond to her anymore. I try to change the subject where I make a joke like, I'm still saving up for a PlayStation 5, Lisa, chill with the ring talk, but she wouldn't let it go. It started to get uncomfortable. And honestly, I started to feel trapped. I knew I wasn't ready to take that step, and yet there she was, making me feel like I was falling behind on some unspoken timeline. Then things escalated fast. The next date we had, she said she wanted to introduce me to her dad. I wasn't exactly sure why, but I thought, okay, cool, I'm open to meeting her family at some point. I didn't think much of it. We met at this small Italian restaurant, nothing fancy, just some pasta and wine. Her dad seemed nice enough at first, older than I expected, probably in his late 50s, well dressed, a little formal but polite. He asked me questions about my job, my family, that sort of thing. I'm thinking, all right, this is a standard family dinner, right? But then, after the small talk, the mood shifted. Liz's dad looked at me with this kind of serious, almost calculating stare, and I couldn't help but notice how quiet everything got. I was suddenly aware how awkward I felt. Lisa was sitting next to me, her hand on mine, like she was just waiting for the magic moment to happen. It felt like I was in some weird play where I didn't know my lines. That's what happened. Her dad, without any warning, leans in and drops a bombshell. He looks me straight in the eye and says something along the lines of, I've been watching you, and I think you've been taking a sweet time with my daughter. It's clear you like her, so when are you going to make it official? When are you going to buy her the ring? Because if you don't, I'm afraid I'm going to have to help you out. I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. I tried to smile, thinking he was joking, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't. He wasn't joking at all. He looked dead serious, like this was a deal he was making on behalf of his daughter. I was still processing everything when he leaned back in his chair and casually added, "If you don't, I'll break your jaw. Simple as that." Yeah, you read that right. He said he would break my jaw. At that moment, I felt like the world had flipped upside down. I couldn't believe it. I had just met this guy, and now he was threatening me over something that hadn't even crossed my mind until his daughter started asking about it. I didn't even know how to react. I just sat there, frozen, trying to figure out if this was some sort of weird joke, or if this guy was seriously about to go full mobster on me. Lisa, sitting beside me, was completely calm. She didn't even blink. She just sat there with this smile, like everything was perfectly normal. It hit me then that this wasn't just about a ring or a proposal. It was an expectation. Her dad had probably been pushing her toward this, and now she was pushing me. There was no room for taking it slow or let's figure things out. It was all about the ring, the marriage, the future she had in mind. I felt suffocated. I didn't know if I should get up and leave or just sit there and pretend everything was fine. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I just stayed silent, my mind racing, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. Liz's dad took a sip of wine, looking satisfied with the whole conversation, while I just stared at the table. I felt like I was being cornered into something I wasn't ready for, and I had no idea how to escape. Lisa was still holding my hand, her grip tighter now, like she was waiting for me to make the next move. Finally, I just stood up. I didn't say a word. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I couldn't stay there. I wasn't going to let anyone pressure me into something I wasn't ready for, especially not under the threat of violence. I grabbed my jacket, gave Lisa a look, one that I hoped said everything, and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I didn't even care if she came after me. I just needed to get away. I could still feel the weight of her dad's words hanging over me like some weird ultimatum. I haven't talked to Lisa since. I blocked her on everything. It wasn't just about the ring anymore. It was about how quickly things turned from a normal relationship into some sort of strange, high-pressure situation where a guy's family was threatening me. Looking back, I'm not even mad, just relieved. That situation was a red flag so big I could see it from miles away. Okay, this one's a little hard to talk about, but I'll give it a shot. Honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. It started like a normal date, but things took a turn that I definitely didn't expect. If anything, this situation just made me realize how little you can truly know about someone until you meet them in person. So, I matched with Darren on a dating app. He seemed pretty cool at first. He had a nice smile, we were both into similar music, and he seemed laid back. He didn't send any weird messages or come off as pushy, which, to be honest, is a rare thing on dating apps. We chatted for a week or two, got to know each other a bit, and then decided to meet up for coffee. Nothing fancy. I wasn't expecting anything major, just wanted to see if the chemistry was there in person. When I walked into the cafe, I spotted him right away. He was sitting by the window, looking kind of nervous, but cute in a chill way. I walked up and sat down, and we immediately started talking like we'd known each other for a while. The conversation flowed easily at first. We talked about music, movies, random stuff. Everything seemed normal. But then, about halfway through the date, he kind of stopped mid-sentence and looked at me like he was deciding whether or not to say something. At first, I thought maybe he was just nervous or overthinking the whole thing, but when he started talking again, I realized it was something a lot more serious than I was expecting. He told me that he had something he needed to share with me, something that might make things a little awkward. Now, I've dated a few people who had their own pasts, and always open-minded about that kind of stuff. People have their stories, right? So I'm sitting there thinking maybe he has some crazy ex or something wild in his background. But what he said next completely threw me off. Darren told me that he was transitioning from female to male. He said he was currently in the middle of the process, and that's why his chest still looked a bit large. He apologized for not mentioning it earlier, like explaining that he didn't want to make it weird. He also added that he was fully on testosterone and had been for a while, so he didn't want me to be confused or feel uncomfortable. Honestly, I didn't know how to respond right away. I kind of just stared at him, processing everything he said. I had no problem with people transitioning. If that's what someone wants to do with their life, cool, that's their business. But hearing it in person was a lot different than reading about it in an article or watching a documentary. There was this weird feeling in my chest like I didn't know how to handle it. The thing that really caught me off guard was how nonchalant he was about it. Like he just casually brought it up, like he was talking about what kind of coffee he liked. I'm not saying it was a big deal. He's allowed to be open and honest, of course, but the whole thing felt so sudden. One minute we're talking about our favorite bands, and the next, he's explaining this huge part of his identity. As much as I didn't want to be that person who made a big deal out of it, I was still in shock. I mean, this was a pretty intense revelation for a first date. I didn't know how to act. I wanted to be supportive, but I also didn't want to make things uncomfortable by saying the wrong thing. I wasn't sure if I should even mention anything about how I felt or just move on with the conversation. So we both just sat there in silence for a second. Eventually, I tried to act like it didn't bother me. I smiled, nodded, and told him I respected his honesty. I even said I admired how he was so open about his transition. But to be completely honest, my mind was racing. I kept thinking about how he looked, about the fact that, even though he was clearly trying to be a guy, his body hadn't caught up with his identity yet. I don't want to sound shallow or insensitive, but it felt like there was a disconnect. His face looked male, but his body didn't. It was like my brain couldn't quite put everything together. He was talking about all these things with such confidence, but I felt like I was still processing. We kept talking for a while, but the vibe had definitely shifted. It was like something had been said that couldn't be unsaid, and now I had to deal with it. It wasn't even about being judgmental. It was just a weird feeling of being in uncharted territory. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say more about it or just act like everything was fine. But the more we talked, the more I realized something. Darren wasn't just transitioning. He was still in this process of figuring out who he was and how he wanted to present himself. He made it clear that he was in a very in-between stage and seemed like he was trying to get some validation from me. He mentioned how hard it was sometimes to deal with people's reactions, how many people had trouble accepting him, and how it felt like a never-ending battle. The more I listened, the more I felt like I wasn't just on a date. I was part of some bigger emotional journey for him. He wasn't just looking for a girlfriend. He was looking for someone who could accept him for who he was, transition or not. At some point, the date ended. We got up, said our goodbyes, and I told him I'd text him. But honestly, I wasn't sure if I would. It wasn't because I didn't like him as a person, but because I felt so thrown off. I didn't know how to deal with everything that was happening in my own head. I ended up texting him that night, thanking him for being honest with me and telling him I thought he was really cool. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I could get past the physical disconnect. His chest, the fact that his transition was so obviously in progress, it all felt like too much for me to handle. It wasn't even about him being trans. It was about me realizing I wasn't as comfortable as I thought I would be in that situation. We didn't end up going on a second date. He texted me a few days later, asking if I wanted to meet up again, but I just didn't know how to respond. I wasn't looking for a relationship where I felt like I had to make someone's journey my own. I didn't want to lead him on, and I didn't want to make him feel like he wasn't good enough either. I just didn't think I was ready for that kind of situation. Looking back on it now, I feel guilty, to be honest. I think Darren was just looking for someone to understand him, and I wish I could have been that person. But it was a lot to handle in such a short time. I don't know if I'll ever truly understand how people feel when they're transitioning, but I can only hope that Darren finds someone who can really be there for him through it all. Okay, so here's the story. Honestly, it still messes with my head whenever I think about it. It all started like a normal dating app situation, you swipe, you match, you chat for a bit, then you meet up, see if there's a spark. But this was a whole different level of weird. So, I matched with Pam on a dating app about a month ago. She was cute, seemed super chill, and we hit it off instantly. We started texting and hanging out pretty regularly. Like, we grab coffee, go for walks, just talk about life. It felt like something was actually building, like it wasn't just a casual thing. We had great conversations, laughed a lot, and I started thinking maybe this could turn into something serious. It felt real. But then, after about a month of dating, something started to feel off. At first, it was subtle. Pam would take longer to reply to my texts, and sometimes she'd go a whole day without responding. I tried not to overthink it. People get busy, right? I mean, I wasn't texting her every second, but I was definitely wondering why the responses were coming slower and slower. After about a week of barely hearing from her, I thought maybe I'd give her space, but that didn't make it any easier. Then it happened. I sent a message one night, and I got nothing. I figured maybe she was busy, so I gave her some time. Days went by, and still nothing. No explanation. No, hey, sorry, I've been dealing with stuff. No, nothing. It was like she completely disappeared. I was confused, but honestly, I didn't want to seem desperate, so I tried not to freak out about it. A week later, I saw something that completely flipped my world upside down. I was at this bar with a couple of friends, just grabbing a drink and trying to forget about the whole Pam situation. I was sitting with my buddy Dave, who's one of my best friends. We were chatting about random stuff when suddenly I noticed Pam walk in. At first, I thought maybe it was just some weird coincidence. But then, as she walked toward the bar, I saw who she was with. It was Dave. Dave, my best friend. And from the way they were laughing and talking, it didn't look like they were just friends catching up. It looked like a couple, like a full-on relationship. I can't even describe the feeling that hit me. It was like someone punched me in the stomach. My first thought was, what the hell? I mean, how could Pam be hanging out with Dave, acting like nothing happened between us, and then ghost me for a week? How could she just move on like that, and with my best friend? I didn't know what to do. I froze for a second, just sitting there staring. They hadn't noticed me yet, but Pam definitely did. When she saw me, she gave me this awkward little wave, but didn't come over. She just looked at me for a second, then turned back to Dave. That's when it hit me that this whole thing had been a setup. I don't know what Pam's deal was, but it felt like she'd been playing both of us the whole time. I couldn't believe it. The whole month we'd been seeing each other. I thought things were going well. Sure, we had a couple of weird moments where communication was off, but that happens, right? It didn't feel like anything major, but now sitting there in that bar, it all made sense. I sat there for another minute trying to figure out if I should go out to them or just leave. Honestly, I didn't want to make a scene, and part of me was embarrassed to confront them, especially in front of other people. So I decided to just get up and leave. I grabbed my jacket, paid for my drink, and walked out. As soon as I was outside, I called Dave. I don't know why, but I just had to hear from him. I asked him straight up what was going on. Was he seeing Pam? Were they together? He sounded confused at first, but then it all came out. Apparently, Pam had told him that she and I were just friends, and that she was into him now. That's when it clicked. The whole time I thought we were on the same page, but Pam had already made her decision. She wasn't into me anymore, and she'd moved on to Dave. And she'd done it in the most cowardly way possible, by accosting me without any explanation and then showing up with him in public like nothing was wrong. Dave was honestly just as shocked as I was. He said he hadn't known about me and Pam dating, that she never mentioned me in any way. He was just under the impression that she was single, and they'd been hanging out casually. But now that I was telling him the whole story, he felt pretty bad. He said he wasn't trying to hurt me, but it was clear that Pam had been leading both of us on at the same time, and it wasn't even like she was ashamed of it. After the conversation with Dave, I felt a weird mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was pissed, like beyond pissed, that Pam would play me like that. But on the other hand, I kind of felt sorry for Dave. He didn't deserve to get dragged into this mess either. I didn't want to blame him, but it felt so messed up, like Pam had orchestrated this whole thing behind both our backs. I didn't reach out to Pam after that. I thought about texting her, but what would I even say? I was just angry and hurt. I felt like an idiot for not seeing it coming. I wasn't expecting anything crazy or perfect from dating, but this whole situation felt like a slap in the face. I wasn't even mad that she was with Dave. If that's what she wanted, fine. But the fact that she couldn't just be upfront with me and instead ghosted me like I was nothing, that's what really got to me. A few weeks went by after the whole bar incident, and I tried to move on. I stopped talking to Dave for a bit, mostly because I needed space. I didn't want things to get weird between us, but I also didn't want to pretend that everything was fine. Eventually, we started hanging out again, but things weren't the same. Pam and I never spoke again, and I'm honestly fine with it. I have no idea what her deal was, and at this point, I don't care. I'm just glad I learned the truth before I got more invested in her game. I still run into her sometimes, but now it's like she's a stranger. I'm over it, but I'll always remember how it felt to get ghosted and played in the most bizarre way possible. I'm still cringing thinking about this date, and I've told a couple of friends about it already, but I feel like I need to get it all out. I swear, dating apps bring out the weirdest in people. I've had my fair share of strange encounters, but this one, it takes the cake. So I matched with this guy named Tim on one of those more low-key dating apps. Nothing too fancy, just a few quick swipes and matches. He had a good profile. His pictures were decent, he looked chill, and his bio was basic but funny. Just some standard stuff. He was a freelancer, which, let's be real, could mean anything, and said he loved photography, hiking, and chilling with friends. Pretty normal stuff. I wasn't expecting fireworks, but he seemed like someone you could have a nice conversation with, so we started texting. We went back and forth for about a week, mostly just getting to know each other. Then Tim asked me if I wanted to meet up. We agreed on a casual coffee date, so nothing too crazy. He suggested a place that was tucked away a bit, a small cafe that I'd never been to but seemed cozy from the photos on the app. I agreed, and we set the time for that Saturday. The day came, and I walked into the cafe, a little nervous but mostly excited. I didn't have high expectations, but I was still hopeful it would be a decent date. I spotted him right away. Tim was sitting in the corner, looking pretty relaxed. He waved me over, and I smiled back as I walked up to the table. The first few minutes were pretty standard, nothing out of the ordinary. We talked about how our weeks had been, shared a few stories, and I learned that Tim was really into photography, which was kind of cool. He told me he had a side hustle that involved selling photos, and I assumed he meant portraits, stock photos, maybe some artistic shots. That seemed pretty normal for a freelancer, so I didn't think much of it. Then, as the conversation shifted to what else he did for work, he casually brought up that he sold feet pics online. I don't know why, but I just kind of froze for a second. My first thought was, wait, what? But he explained it pretty quickly, as if it was no big deal. He said he had a website where people paid for pictures of his feet and other people's feet for personal use or artistic purposes, or whatever else he was telling me. I didn't know what to think at that point. It was kind of a strange thing to hear, but I didn't want to judge too quickly. I mean, people do weird stuff for money all the time, right? But then Tim hit me with a kicker. He told me that his business was really picking up, and that he could make a lot of money if I joined in. At first, I thought he was just joking. I mean, we were having coffee, not discussing business deals. But then he got a little more serious, and that's when it clicked that he was being dead serious. He said that if I was interested, he'd take some photos of my feet, and I'd get a 5% commission on every sale of the pictures. I could even upload them myself if I wanted, and he helped promote it. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if he was being weird or just making a very strange business pitch. My face must have gone blank because Tim immediately tried to backpedal, saying that it was totally up to me, and that he didn't want to make me uncomfortable or anything. But at that point, I already felt weird, like a switch had flipped, and I wasn't sure how to get out of this situation. I tried to play it cool, pretending that I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to make a scene or get angry, but everything in my body was screaming, "What the hell, Tim?" He kept going on about how easy it was and how it was just a way to make some extra cash while doing something that wasn't too out there. I think he even said something like, "It's not like I'm asking you to do anything crazy," which made me even more uncomfortable because what kind of offer is this exactly? He could tell I was thrown off, but still didn't back off. He kept talking about the logistics, like how he would set up a little photo shoot for me if I wanted, or that I could take the pictures myself, but he'd give me guidelines to make them look more professional. I just kept nodding along, not really listening to everything he was saying. My brain was too busy processing what he had just proposed. Was I supposed to just be cool with this? Was he seriously trying to recruit me for this thing? I wasn't even sure if he was looking at this like a business opportunity or if he was just super into feet and had figured out a way to make it work for him. Eventually, he noticed I was pretty quiet. He asked me if I was still interested, and I just said I wasn't sure. He didn't seem to get how uncomfortable I was and kept pushing. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run out of that cafe and never look back, but I didn't want to seem rude or dramatic. So I just sat there, half listening to him and trying to think of a way to politely get out of this conversation. Finally, after what felt like forever, the date came to an end. I said I had to go because I had an early morning the next day, which was a complete lie. I just needed to get out of there. As we said goodbye, he looked at me like I was going to agree to his foot pics business venture. I felt like I had just stepped into some strange alternate reality where people actually make money doing something like that. As I walked away, I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. It was just off. So off. I didn't hear from Tin after that date, and to be honest, I was kind of relieved. It was one of those situations where I felt like I had narrowly escaped something way too weird. I deleted his contact info, and I didn't even bother to block him. I just pretended like it never happened. I've been on a lot of weird dates, but this one takes the crown. I'm all for making money however you want, but this was just next level uncomfortable. And honestly, if you're out there reading this and some ever pitches you a foot pic side hustle on a first date, just run. Trust me, you'll thank me later. So I still can't believe what happened on that date. It's honestly messed up, and I have to tell someone about it. I met this girl, Hannah, on a dating app. I wasn't expecting anything crazy, just a casual meetup to see if there was a vibe. Our profile was cool, we had a lot in common, and the chats were pretty fun. She seemed down to earth, and from her pictures, she was cute. I'm mixed race, so I've gotten used to people having questions or making weird assumptions, but I didn't think much of it when we set up the date. We decided to meet at this cute cafe downtown. I got there a little early, grabbed a table, and waited. When she walked in, I'll be honest, I was a bit taken aback. I didn't recognize her at first because she looked, well, different from her pictures. Maybe it was the lighting or something, but she didn't seem like the same person at all. But that was fine, whatever. We said hey, exchanged the usual pleasantries, and sat down. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. We talked about our jobs, hobbies, some random stuff. But as we started talking more, I noticed her glancing at me a little strangely. It wasn't the kind of look you get when someone's just trying to figure you out, but more like confusion. And I don't know why, but I started getting a bad feeling. Out of nowhere, she said, "I thought you were lighter in the pictures." I didn't know how to respond to that, but I figured it was just a weird comment and moved on. People don't always look like their photos, right? It didn't seem like a big deal at first, but she kept bringing it up. Then things took a hard left turn. She made this weird comment about how she was worried about what color our baby would be if we kept dating. I didn't know how to react. I'm sitting there trying to process what she just said because, what the hell? First off, I barely know this girl, and second, why would that even be something that came up naturally in a conversation? I kept waiting for the punchline, thinking it was a joke, but it wasn't. She went on to say that it wasn't just the color thing that bothered her, but how it might affect her family or how people would see us. She talked about how her parents were old-fashioned and might not be cool with us dating if I was too dark. I'm not going to lie, at that point I was just staring at her, wondering if this was a bad dream. It's hard to put into words how that made me feel. I've dealt with racism and microaggressions before, but this was something else. She literally told me she wasn't sure she could keep dating me because she was scared of what people might think if our kids didn't look white enough or whatever. It was like she couldn't even see me as a person, just a color. Like my race was some sort of weird obstacle for her to get over. I was honestly shocked. I had no idea how to handle that. I kept looking at her, trying to see if maybe she was just joking. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized she wasn't. I felt disgusted, but also confused. It was one of those moments where you just don't know what to say because it's so messed up. At some point, I just couldn't sit there anymore. I told her I had to go, that I wasn't feeling well or something, and got up to leave. She looked surprised, almost like she didn't understand why I was upset. Honestly, I think she thought she was just being honest or practical, but that whole conversation made me feel like I wasn't even a person to her. I'm just some potential mix for her to calculate out, like my race and skin color were some weird equation to solve. I walked out of the cafe, and it felt like I was in a daze. I don't even know how I ended up in my car. I think I was just trying to shake off what had just happened. I'd never wanted to think I'd ever have to deal with something like that, especially on a date. I mean, who even thinks like that? I didn't talk to her again after that. Honestly, I deleted her number right after I left. I didn't even want to try to make sense of what happened, because there was no sense to be made. What she said wasn't just ignorant, it was outright racist and gross. Like, who even says that to someone? I'd never even told my friends about it right away. I don't think I was ready to process it, or maybe I just didn't want to relive it. It's one of those experiences that makes you second guess your judgment and wonder if there's something wrong with people. I get that people have their issues, but to just come out with something that blatantly racist and make me feel like I'm some kind of problem. It's been a while since that happened, but I still can't fully wrap my head around it. Anyway, yeah, that was my worst dating experience, hands down. Definitely the weirdest, creepiest, and most disturbing one I've had in a while. I can laugh at it now, but back then it was just a total mind hoop. I don't even know what she was expecting out of that conversation, but it definitely wasn't a second date. I thought I had it figured out. A chill date, a simple football game, nothing too crazy. That's what I signed up for when I agreed to meet Dean. I'd seen him on the dating app, and honestly, he seemed cool. Good profile, easygoing vibe. We'd been chatting for a while, and I thought it would be a solid first date. I mean, I love a good game, right? I thought it would be a fun, low pressure way to get to know each other. Boy, was I wrong. We decided on a football game, his idea, which seemed like a great way to spend an afternoon. He said he had tickets, and it seemed like he was really into it, so I figured he knew the drill. He offered to buy the tickets ahead of time, but I wasn't fully comfortable with that. I was new to this whole dating thing again after a long break, and I didn't want to feel like I owed him anything. So I suggested I pay for my own, just in case. We agreed on that, and I thought we were good. When I showed up to meet him, everything seemed fine. We walked to the stadium together, chatted about random things, work, hobbies, the usual stuff you talk about when you're just getting to know someone. I was actually feeling a little excited because football games are always fun, even if you're not the biggest fan. The vibe in the air was good, and I was thinking this could be the start of something cool. But then the weirdness started creeping in. We walked up to the ticket booth, and he handed me one of the tickets. I glanced at it, and immediately I noticed something was off. The seats were on opposite sides of the stadium. One was on the east side, and the other was all the way across on the west side. I looked up at him, trying to piece together what had just happened, but he was already heading toward the entrance, not really noticing that I was confused. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of what was going on. Why would he buy tickets for two separate seats? It didn't make any sense. I thought maybe it was an honest mistake, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized he hadn't said anything about us sitting apart. We hadn't talked about where we'd be sitting. And yet here I was, holding a ticket to sit alone on the other side of the stadium while he was sitting by himself too. At this point, I'm trying to decide whether I should say something or just go along with it, because I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want to spend the whole game sitting by myself. So I followed him in, still unsure about what was happening, and we headed for our separate sections. As I walked away from him, my stomach twisted a little. It felt off, like I was starting to get a sense that maybe this wasn't going to go the way I thought. When I finally sat down in my seat, I pulled out my phone, trying to make sense of the situation. I looked at the ticket again, trying to see if maybe there was some mistake. But nope, it was clear. There was no way we were supposed to be in two separate places. Not unless we were part of some weird VIP setup, which didn't make sense because there was no mention of that when we first talked about the tickets. I texted him, asking if there was a mix-up with the seats, but he didn't respond right away. So I just sat there, feeling like an idiot, watching the game by myself. There were fans everywhere, and the noise was deafening, but I felt totally disconnected from it all. I couldn't understand why I was even there, so far away from him, when we were supposed to be together. About halfway through the first quarter, he texted back, but his message made my stomach turn. He said that he just found his seat and was excited to watch the game. I didn't understand. Was he just ignoring the fact that we weren't sitting together? I felt like I was losing my mind. But it didn't stop there. As the game went on, I started to get more frustrated, and that's when things got even weirder. At halftime, I walked out of the stadium to grab a drink and some food. I was hoping I'd run into him or maybe just catch up for a minute. But instead of seeing him somewhere near the concession stands like I expected, I saw him chatting with some other girl. At first, I thought it was just a random encounter, but as I got closer, I realized that they were really cozy with each other. He was standing close to her, laughing, and they looked like they were having a good time. I didn't know what to think. Was I just being paranoid, or was this actually what it looked like? My gut was telling me something was wrong, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. So I just stood there for a second, trying to process everything. But as the minutes ticked by, it became harder to ignore. I finally walked up to him, and that's when it hit me. He hadn't even thought to ask if I wanted to meet up again after the game. He didn't check in or acknowledge that we weren't sitting together. He just went off and did his own thing. At that point, I felt like an idiot. I don't know why I stayed for as long as I did. I should have left when I realized he wasn't even making an effort. I mean, I paid for my own ticket. I was spending the game sitting alone. When I saw him with the other girl, it hit me like a ton of bricks. That was the moment when I realized that this wasn't just a case of miscommunication. Dean had been stringing me along, not caring whether I had a good time or not. I wasn't just a date to him. I was a filler until he found something better. I left the game early before the second half even started. I didn't want to stick around for the awkwardness. When I walked out of the stadium, I didn't even bother to text him again. I knew that this was over. It wasn't a good date, it wasn't a good situation, and frankly, I felt pretty stupid for not realizing it sooner. The whole thing just felt like a setup for failure from the beginning. I guess what I learned from it is to trust my instincts more, and maybe next time I'll just take the tickets myself. But yeah, that date with Dean, never again.